I'm Anna Nichols. I'm the Director of Communications for Altair Advisers. And as many of you know, we host programs focused on issues beyond the financial markets. And today we're going to focus on a topic that is a concern to many of our clients, which is retirement. And for our clients, it's less of an issue of can I afford to retire and more one of how will I handle retirement? A lot of our clients are at the helm of their own business, or maybe they're an executive in a large company. And these are big jobs done by generally people who are excited about what they do every day at work. So stepping away from this work and this life is hard. There isn't a financial worry so much as the worry about replacing what will I do on a day-to-day basis? How will I handle this? So that's what we're going to focus on today. How do you define this next phase of your life? What are the practices and the things that we can do to make a plan for that, just as we all make a plan for the financial aspects of retirement? So joining us today are two experts on this topic. First, we're going to hear from Stephanie Brun de Pontet. She is a principal consultant with the Family Business Consulting Group, an organization focused on helping enterprise families manage the challenges that come with owning and maintaining a significant business and transitioning it to future generations. Now, I've heard Stephanie present and interview family business leaders in different conferences over the years, so I knew about her work in the family business field. I was thrilled when I came across her book that she had recently written called Transitioning from the Top, which focuses on this exact topic of helping people in significant leadership roles transition to the next phase in their life. So we're excited to have her with us. Also joining us today is Paula Giovacchini, a retirement coach and consultant who works with individual professionals as well as leadership teams to manage transitions and develop strategic plans. When I reached out to Paula about this program, she had such energy about her work in this area. Her way of talking about retirement as a life phase that could last 20 or 30 years really resonated with how we were thinking about this topic. So Paula's going to help us think about how to evaluate different aspects of your personal and professional life and make a plan for fulfilling retirement. Stephanie and Paula are both going to reference a few workshop kind of exercises throughout the program today. And we want you to know we will be sending those to you after the program, and they will also be available on our website. So you can look for those there. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and welcome Stephanie.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Anna. It was a great conference that we were able to do in person, which again, in this day and age, we learn not to take those things for granted. But we're excited to be able to do this program again for folks who couldn't get to Chicago when we did the session last. And it was, I think, a great opportunity for people just to think a little bit differently about a topic that should impact everybody in some point or phase. I think a lot about this construct as sort of personal continuity. And I think Paula will speak to that really practically in her session, because, in our work with families that are in business, we do a lot of planning around continuity of the enterprise and do we have the structures, et cetera, for that. But one of the factors is what, a person who, as Anna pointed out, really loves what they do and is really energized by their professional career and they've achieved a great deal of success. This idea of not doing it is challenging. It's certainly challenging to one's sense of self and kind of who I am and what I do in the world. So I am not able to move the slides. So if somebody wants to give me that little, there we go. Maybe, there we go. I see it. Excellent. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about planning and being intentional about kind of your personal continuity, transitioning from the top, from a leadership role, whether it be in your family's business or from a very successful career as a professional in a corporate structure or as an entrepreneur, is a big part of who you are. And so moving away from that role and redefining oneself, it takes some planning and takes some thought. So, this is hard. And I think one of the things that I think both Paula and I want to communicate to the audience is to build a little bit of empathy for yourself, for your partners or anybody else who is going through this process. When you're at a very capable person kind of at the peak of your career, you're having fun. In fact, I was just before this on a call with a client that was basically articulating that, she was struggling with the idea of moving a lot of authority down to the next generation, mostly because she's having fun doing what she's doing. And so that's a very understandable concern. On top of that, we have a lot of assumptions, or sometimes not always the most positive language that comes with this concept of this next phase of life. People talk about retirement as like the R word. And as we move on to this sort of third stage of our life, it's also potentially threatening to our sense of kind of ongoing relevance, right? We like to have purpose. We like to feel like when we get up in the morning and we do things, that our efforts matter, right? And so this question of, can I still contribute? Will I be relevant? What will I do with my days? Am I going to be bored? If I am experiencing some health challenges or some physical decline, then that the anxieties that one has around that can then kind of be blended in with this whole planning for this journey. And if you've spent a lot of your waking hours with the professional team around you, whomever that is, it can feel a little threatening to think about all of those things that you're losing, really, or there's a perception of a lot of loss that comes with anticipating this next stage. So, what do people do when they're faced with something that's uncomfortable? You might put your head in the sand, and not really want to engage in the planning. I think sometimes we will see that with business leaders where they kind of don't want to talk about it, in part because it is very threatening. Certainly in the world that I work in, that can be very challenging to all of the success that this leader has been a pivotal part of can potentially be put at risk if we're not able to engage in some planning. And part of that planning really does need to take into consideration the individual leader's next stage in their professional and personal journey. And so, denial is probably not the best approach, but it's a very common one for sure. As I've alluded to, this is a threat to your identity. We, in particular in North America, we really do define ourselves by what we do. And not just how we define ourselves, but how other people often will define us or relate to us, right? We do have a need for purpose and relevance as humans. We need to feel like when we get up in the morning, there's something for us to go and do, and that has impact in some manner. This impact does affect a lot of stakeholders. So not just the individual, but their spouse, the people on their team that they currently work with. Potentially, there's anticipated anxiety about how customers might perceive this, et cetera. And there really are losses that you experience and changes. I mean, some of these, hopefully you see that there's also gains, but what one can really be focused on a little bit, and we do tend to see losses more painfully than the gains. So there may be both gains and losses, but the losses are real. And it's a lot of uncertainty, right? We know what it looks like to be in the role that we're in today, getting up in the morning and doing our job. We don't really know what that that new phase will look like. And so it's reasonable that would cause some stress. Ambitious and successful people, in order to get to the accomplishments that they've attained, need to invest a tremendous amount of time and effort along the way. And so that tends to be a strong investment in this one particular role, your work role. And so it's normal that folks who are very successful, the extent to which their profession defines them is perhaps higher than the average. Right? In the context of the universe that I typically work in with family businesses, that professional role also is connected to your family role. So that the overlapping roles of even kind of who am I in the family system is influenced a little bit perhaps by my professional leadership role in the enterprise. And so I might anticipate that I'm losing relevance in two domains of my life. So again, adding to the stress or the challenge of this particular piece. So this idea that if most of how I think about myself and how the world thinks about me is related to this role, then it can feel like an existential threat to step away from that role. Really, the sense of, if I'm not the CEO of this enterprise, there's no other way that I define myself. So it feels very empty, right? And so that feels like an existential threat. In the United States, we do tend to have a strong affiliation and a strong need to indicate how hard we're working. We all talk about how busy we are. And so on average, we're working, well over, quote unquote, the 40-hour work week. And that's, certainly even more so in the case of leaders, CEOs of major companies, et cetera, tending to work 12 to 16-hour days. I think that's true for entrepreneurs, that are building a business on their own. The hours that you put in are really very significant. And so again, I think that just amplifies this experience. These are quotes from individuals that I interviewed to write the book that I wrote on this topic called Transitioning from the Top. And what I tried to do in that book is not just sort of talk about some of these concepts, but also interviewed about a dozen CEOs who had done a really good job transitioning and getting their wisdom to try and provide some exemplars for folks to think a little bit about and give hope to too. We're going to talk about some of the challenges, but we want to help people recognize that there's individuals who've been there before and have done it successfully. But so this is, one of these CEOs saying, I was stunned at how much of my ego and persona became attached to the title, the role, and the business. Nothing can capture the special passion that I clearly had as the family business CEO. So again, this sense of loss, right? Like, even if I have a plan and I know what I'm going to do, like, this was a peak experience, right? And so that feels, again, difficult to let go of. And this is a contrast for, this was one of the only women that I interviewed. And interestingly, she had a slightly different approach. She had watched her father really struggle with a letting go journey. And so when she came into the CEO role, she was quite purposeful with herself of thinking of this as a term in office and not sort of letting it define her quite as much as she had seen the challenge for her father. So this is just a little example of that worksheet that Anna pointed out that we're going to provide to you. And I just wanted to show you what it looks like. It's, again, meant to be a little self-assessment to help you take stock of, to what extent is my work role very central to my life? Like, is it, much higher than most people, a little bit lower? Because the extent to which this role in your life is very, very central, you might anticipate that this transition could be a little bit harder. So, again, it's a kind of a Likert score thing. You should just walk through and circle the response that most aligns with the answer to the question for yourself. And then you're just going to do a little bit of a math exercise, counting the number of times you answered 1, 2, 3, or 5, basically. Through this, multiply it by those numbers, and then bring that down to get to a total score. And you'll also get these slides. And so you'll be able to sort of see, okay, if you have a low score like 8 to 20, that suggests that the extent to which your personal identity is very dominated by your professional role is not as high, right? You have a lot of other things going on. The 20 to 30 might have some room to improve. And if your score is quite high, then perhaps, again, this idea of centrality of your professional role is probably quite pronounced. And so might encourage you to do a little bit more active thinking about that. So that's what that tool is about. Then the second topic I wanted to talk about is this, again, this purpose need that we have, right? And I think that's particularly pronounced for, again, very successful individuals, business leaders, or, a very accomplished doctor, et cetera. These individuals who have this level of success typically are pretty goal-driven, right? And so they may have a strong kind of a competitive instinct to feel like they can sort of evaluate and measure themselves against their goals. And so this is difficult to replicate outside of a professional context. And to the extent that this is something that you know about yourself that's important to you, it might really be important to think about as you kind of curate the life you want for yourself when you're not in your current day job on a day-to-day level, how do I ensure that I am finding the level of satisfaction that I need around this metric? And again, I think all of us as humans, we do want to feel like we matter. And it can become threatening as we get older to feel like our relevance is declining. Well, our relevance is declining. We're less in the know about certain kinds of things. And so if people are replacing us in our professional role, again, it's a threat to our sense of ongoing relevance and purpose. And purpose is really powerful. So again, these are some quotes from those CEOs, and recognizing that there was sort of a withdrawal pain around that, right? That when you're leading an enterprise, what you say and do has a direct impact. People listen to you, you provide strategic guidance, things happen as a consequence of that. And so how do I find a purpose that allows me to continue to have impact, perhaps in a different forum? So this quote is from an individual who found a really compelling volunteering initiative that really spoke to his heart, right? That when he found out that 30% of students didn't graduate high school in his community, he really decided to get involved and tried to bring some of the best practices from his business experience into kind of the public educational universe to concretely address this problem. That gave him purpose and helped him really get excited, right, about this new initiative that he was taking on. And then, you have to be careful of overcorrecting. So one of a family member that I work with, the leader of a business, said that within 6 months of transitioning out of the business, he'd said yes to new opportunities 28 times. Well, that is perhaps a little bit of overkill, where perhaps some anxiety of not feeling like I'm going to be able to contribute and I'm going to be able to be relevant. 3 different people ask you to be on a board and you say yes to all of them. And then you have this volunteer project and you have these other things, right? And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I thought I retired. Why am I busier, right? And the other thing I would say is it's maybe worthwhile to experiment a little bit, be thoughtful about taking a minute to breathe so that you're saying yes to the things that are going to most resonate and most fit kind of the overall life that you're trying to build for yourself. I think it's really important to think about that these processes do not happen in a vacuum, right? You're not alone on an island and it's only you that any of this is impacting. It's going to impact the people around you. And there's a lot of stakeholders who can be affected, and they can either intentionally or unconsciously resist this process out of their own anxiety about this change, right? So again, in the context that I typically work in, family-owned businesses, there can be family members who have some anxiety about your role as the leader of the enterprise, where they have a lot of confidence, they don't worry about it when you're at the helm. And it's not that they don't trust the successor. It's just that, again, the successor is an unknown quantity, and maybe they don't trust them as much or what have you, but that can create a lot of tension and anxiety in the system. You also will have your family members, whether or not you're working in a family business, whether it be your spouse, your children, they may have a point of view about these things. And certainly with your spouse, how aligned are you in terms of the timing of both of your transitions out of your day-to-day, go intense work roles to a different stage of life? I see a lot of families navigating that with the complexity of one person being ready, 5 or 10 years sooner than the other one. And so that, that creates potentially, just questions in the couple. How will we organize our life if we're not exactly on the same page around that? And to the extent that we then land at the same stage of life, what's our definition of what that looks like, right? One of you may think, I'd like to spend, more time in Florida or what have you. And the other one's thinking, no, I have a lot of connections and relationships here, or the grandchildren are here or whatever. So how are we having conversations so that we can get aligned on that? It can be really important. The other stakeholders, could include your senior leadership team, right? The people that you work with every day. When you're a business leader, it's not at all uncommon that the team of people around you kind of grew up with you in the business, right? And so their anxiety about your anticipated departure because it can be threatening to their sense of ongoing relevance. Even if they're going to stay in the business, they may worry that the next leader is not going to value their counsel or engage them in the same way that you have engaged them. And so they may feel that that is threatening. And again, they may intentionally or unintentionally put some obstacles into this process because of how they're processing it in terms of their ongoing work role, et cetera. With the successor, who's going to take over for the job that you're currently stepping out of? Is that person ready? What are we doing around that? What's their sense of readiness? Some of them are really eager and might be gently nudging you out the door. Others may not feel like that and may feel like, they want to have access to you sort of as a mentor or as an ongoing guide. And so what does that relationship look like? How do we clarify that to each other so that you're not getting in their way or, overstepping their authority, and you have a mechanism for continuing to provide support and continuing to support that transition. Again, there's no one size fits all to that process and what is right in your specific situation. All I'm advocating is that you need to be intentional about these conversations, clarifying vis-a-vis the enterprise, especially if it's a business that you have an ownership stake in or ongoing role. What does your role look like? What's in bounds? What's out of bounds? Does everybody understand that? Is the board of directors and the rest of the senior management team going to allow your successor to truly take leadership? And again, what's your role vis-a-vis supporting that complex dance and complex process? And are there other outside business stakeholders, whether it be key clients, key vendors, your banks, right? You want to make sure all of these stakeholders are kind of aware of this process and comfortable, and you have a mechanism to get them comfortable with the people who will be taking on these responsibilities so that you're managing and protecting the continuity of what you're leaving behind as well. So a few specific issues on the business readiness front, right? Again, fundamentally, is the management bench capable and empowered? What have we been doing? And this is where, you don't want to be doing all of this work and all this thinking kind of in the last 6 months before you're planning your exit, right? We like to think about continuity as a process and not an event, ideally. And ideally, you're spending, at least 5 years really thinking through these questions and engaging in some intentional planning, in ensuring that the management team that is going to succeed you is getting real opportunities to make decisions and demonstrate their competence and demonstrate it for themselves as much as anything else. Because effectively, if you need to maintain control and run every decision through you, you probably, you're not really having a great business continuity plan there, because eventually, you're not going to be around. Are the roles and the responsibilities clear, right? Both for the leadership team that's going to be in place, your own role vis-a-vis that team as an advisor or as a board member. Again, how do we really make sure that people are clear on that? And are we holding people accountable realistically so that everybody's building that confidence? Is the enterprise strong enough to permit a CEO stakeholder to take some chips off the table, right? So that's more relevant in the context of a role that involves, your financial investment being in that business as well. The enterprise needs to be able to allow you to de-risk, from a financial security standpoint, so that, because that will enable you as well to be more comfortable with the letting go process. And is there appropriate and professional oversight in place? That will really help mitigate the concerns of a lot of stakeholders. If you have a strong board, ideally with independent directors, and again, a process for regular communication with the shareholders, and how are we helping give new people practice in being that voice and being that conduit to stakeholders when they've perhaps really gotten comfortable with that primarily being your role. So just important to think about those things. Then on the family readiness side, again, I married him for lunch and not, I married him for life, but not for lunch is sort of a little quip about renegotiating what does the flow of a day look like with your spouse. If your spouse is used to having you go off to the business 10, 12 hours a day, and now that's not your routine, how's that going to work for us, right? So sometimes you have to rediscover your spouse and rediscover your shared interests and passions. And again, just wise to spend a little time deliberately thinking and talking about that. Is the overall family comfortable with the transition and authority? How do we get them comfortable? How do we have those conversations, put that on the table, really invest in that piece? How much time will I get or want with my grandchildren? That goes back to, again, do we have shared expectations about what this looks like? I have several colleagues who have, started to slow down or transition down. They're downshifting the amount of time that they're committing to work so that they can, be available to take their grandchildren, one day a week or whatever to help relieve the burden for their children. And that works well. But, if their children, that wasn't what they were envisioning for the grandchildren, or if the children were assuming that that was going to be the role you're going to play, and that really wasn't what you signed up for, that could create a little bit of frustration or tension. So again, just being thoughtful about what, how do I envision this stage of my life vis-a-vis my extended family? Am I going to move to a new town where the grandchildren are? Are they okay with that? Is that everybody's plan, or is that just sort of a fantasy you have in your mind that really hasn't been vetted with the other stakeholders? And related to that is, again, back to talking with your spouse. Are we planning on moving, right? Do we want to move to a warmer climate? Do we want to get out of the big house just because it's less to manage, or we want more time to travel, or whatever? Again, different people may have really different points of view about that. And so you just don't want to make assumptions that we're all on the same page until you talk about it. And, what's my role in family reunions? Sometimes when you're the leader of the family business, you're really also the patriarch or the matriarch of the family, and you host everybody for various gatherings. So does that role shift as well if I'm no longer leading the operating business? So again, just things to think about to ensure that the family's needs and priorities have been considered a little bit on this journey. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the losses, right? So again, back to these quotes, the world sees you differently, right? When you wear the title of CEO, of leader, or you have a very prestigious title in a large corporation, that comes with some status, and that has value. I think this point that one CEO made to me one time, which I think was really on point, is, everybody said to him, this would be a great transition out of your day-to-day leadership role, is to then become a director. But now he's in his 70s and people are a little bit less comfortable with taking on a director who hasn't had board experience if they're already in their mid 70s. And so, again, that the guidance might be, start looking for opportunities to serve on boards by the time you're in your 50s, so you get a little bit of traction in history with that experience, and that will make it easier for you to transition to some governance roles as part of your post-career life. And again, this notion that of the losses, right? Who is managing your calendar? Who's helping you organize your travel? These things need to be sort of thought about, like how will I organize that stuff if I'm no longer in the role that comes with some administrative support? These are real losses. We've talked about this loss of position, loss of power that you have by virtue of the role that you're in. The routine and a place to go during the day. So again, if you're going to have ongoing responsibilities, either vis-a-vis your business or something else, how will you office, right? Where will that be? Is there space in your house? Do you need to rent an office space? How will you get the administrative support that you need, et cetera? And, change is not something humans always relish. Change is hard. And as we get a little bit more set in our ways, as we get older, it can become harder for us in some ways. features of your particular situation can also make it harder to achieve change if the change is being more imposed on you by virtue of health challenges, or maybe the business is in decline. And so when you don't feel like you have autonomy over like your choices, it will make the changes that you're kind of having imposed on you. You can anticipate that those are harder. And again, the psychology piece, that we really are loss averse. We tend to we experience much more negatively the losses than the relative upside that we get, I guess, of the gains. And so it is part of the challenge here. So hopefully this set of ideas has just given you some food to think a little bit about, and again, hopefully give you some empathy both for yourself and for others around you who may be going through this journey. There's a lot of complexity. It's normal to feel some ambivalence around that, you know, our hope really is to share a little bit of good insights there. So I am going to transition it back here. And we're going to welcome Paula.
Good morning. Stephanie did a great job giving you insights and information in the transition to retirement and some of the losses. And I am going to talk about about finding fulfillment in retirement. We are in the middle of the biggest social experiment that is happening. And this social experiment is that baby boomers who are born between 1933 and 1959 are living an extra 20 to 30 years longer. I'm a baby boomer. And so this is uncharted waters, because this next stage of life, retirement, it could be 20, 25 years. And what we're doing here today is really inviting you to build your social portfolio with the same attention and intention as you build your financial portfolio. And the question that I would like to pose to you is, how will you design your retirement life? We spend more time planning a 2-week vacation, a family vacation, than we do planning this next stage of life. And as Stephanie alluded to, this is really a time to really think about, what will this next stage of life look like? And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what I call the old retirement and the new retirement. The old retirement was primarily rest and leisure. And that works for many people. I have a friend who is about 8 years in retirement, and she does not volunteer. She doesn't do any work. She is just happy as could be with, getting involved in her social activities, visiting with friends, reading books. And so the notion of rest and leisure can work for many people. But for many others, having a 20 or 25 year next stage of life of just rest and leisure may not work. And if you think about it, our life expectancy in 1901 was 47, and in 2015, it's 78. So with this new longevity, we are really having to redesign what this next stage of life looks like. And as Stephanie alluded to, the new retirement, individuals in the new retirement really want purpose and meaning. And how you get purpose and meaning in your life is really going to be unique to you. There isn't a roadmap or a cookie cutter approach, because our lives are structured. We go to school, we go to work, we start a family. We know where we need to be, what we need to do, what we want to do. And this next stage of life is an open canvas. And so the new definition is really helping people follow your dreams and your giftedness. It's thinking about, what is going to give me joy in this next stage of life. And I'd like to break down some myths that we have about retirement. And a few of the myths are that retirement means an end of work. What we're seeing is that those over 65 are the fastest growing workers in the United States. And now work can mean different things. And sometimes what people are doing is they're leaving their what we call their primary work. Maybe they've worked in healthcare for the past 30 years, or as they may have a family business, but then they're taking on a different kind of work. Retirement is a time of decline. We all know, we've heard about the 95-year-old marathon runner. Look at Warren Buffett. Personally, I have two aunts. One is 93, one is 95, and they live across the street from each other. And one of them does not even take an aspirin. They're healthy and they're very active, and it's amazing. Now, some of that probably is good genes. But we are seeing that people are just really living longer. And one of the other myths is that people work primarily because they need the money. And it really is, work gives us more than just money. It gives us purpose, it gives us friendships. And then another myth is that new career ambitions are for young people. We are seeing that 3 out of 5 retirees are launching in new fields. So they're trying something different. They are transforming retirement. Talking a little bit more about baby boomers, 10,000 individuals are turning 65 daily. And 42% envision a phased transition to retirement, maybe not doing a hard stop. What often happens is at the age of 50, we start to think differently about what this next stage means for me. And people can start to integrate some things in their life that they may want to do in the next chapter. So maybe if work was your primary focus, you start to implement or have a little bit more balance. And retirement in some cases can last longer than our primary career. What's important to think about is, what is your attitude about retirement? Because we are seeing that there's a range of different attitudes. And one of the handouts that is going to be available to you is taking an assessment of what your retirement attitude is. And there are 10 statements here, and you can fill this out on your own. You can fill this out with, a partner, a spouse, or anyone else who you know is in this life stage, because our attitudes and our beliefs really drive our actions. So for example, in this attitude assessment, one of the questions, the range is, do you see retirement as an exciting period of your life, or do you see it as very dull and that the best of you is behind? Do you see that retired people have a lot of advantages over younger people, or do you see older individuals as mostly disadvantaged in our society? So this particular exercise is going to give you a chance to get a pulse on what is your attitude, because our attitude is going to drive our actions. And after you complete the questions, here's the key. And it's going to tell you that, yes, your attitude is going to lead you toward a rewarding retirement. Maybe you're somewhat skeptical, but you're open to the possibility. Or if you score a 40 to 50, there's an opportunity for you to develop a more positive attitude toward retirement. And I'd like to just share about George Eastman, who many of you are aware of, started the Eastman Kodak Company and the camera. Very successful, had success, fame, money, power. and work was his life. And 2 months after he retired, his suicide note said, "My work is done. Why wait?" Now, that's a pretty sad story, but he really had a hard time seeing that his future, this next stage of his life, that he had things to contribute. And I invite you to think about that there is so much more left in that you can contribute. So let's look at fulfillment. And retirement can give us hope that there is more left. And we plan our education, we plan our career, we plan for our families, but we sometimes fail to plan for our passions or our joys. And what I'm finding working with clients is that people who have hobbies, interests, causes beside work, that their transition to this next stage of life is easier. And there's a global retirement report was done in 2018, said that 53% of retired people are happy. And so that really begs you to question, we work our whole lives to save for this next stage. Why just 53%? That, how come just 53% are happy? And the key to meaningful retirement is not filling your time, but really creating a portfolio of passions and pursuits that are important to you. And for some people, identifying, okay, what are my passions? What are my interests? How do I want to spend my time is a challenge. And that's what this really is about, is to get you to start thinking about this now. Merrill Lynch did a study, and they said that 95% of retired people enjoy experiences over buying things. And I know I'm a new pickleball player, and pickleball is really becoming the craze for the baby boomers. And again, it's having these experiences. When I work with clients, I see two areas that are really the hardest for transition, and that is work and leisure. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about those two aspects. What we're seeing is that today's retirement, in the new retirement, is really looking at a phased approach, and as opposed to a hard stop. And again, because it could be this 20, 25-year time frame. So for example, if we think about pre-retirement, and maybe this is before the retirement event, I'm going to use the model of 65, where most people look at 65 and say, okay, I'm going to retire. But so using that, so maybe about 5 years before, you'll start thinking about the date. And so what we're seeing is that people will stop working in their primary role and take what's called a career intermission. And this is a time to maybe recharge, relax, retool. And it could be like a 2 to 3 year sabbatical, could be a gap year, but especially for individuals who have very stressful, high charging jobs. I have a client who was in corporate communications as a vice president, and always, just a really challenging job. And she took 2 years off before she could really start to think about even consulting and doing something different. But she needed that time to decompress. And then there's a re-engagement. And this is where individuals are saying, okay, I want some form of work in my life, but I want to do something different. I don't want to go back to what I was. And maybe it's consulting. Maybe it's engaging in a new line of work. And this could be like a 5-year period. So maybe between the ages of 69 to 72, they might be engaging in a different form of work. And then phase 4 is 100% leisure. And that's where you completely stop working. And that could be 74, 72, where because we are healthier and we're living longer, a complete stopping of working could be in your early to mid 70s. And again, I realize that there are many people that health challenges occur, and this model would not necessarily work. But I'm really talking about those who are individuals who are, still vital and healthy as they progress to this next stage. And one of the reasons that work continues to be something to consider is that we get 5 benefits from work. And we live our lives, maybe we work 30 years, and these 5 benefits don't go away once we stop working. And without having a plan to replace these 5 benefits, it's going to make the transition more difficult. So for example, yes, one of the benefits is we get money, we get paid. So how will you maintain your retirement lifestyle? And for many, that's not a problem. So the money part is not an issue. Time management. Work gives us, we know where we need to be, when we need to be. And without that, what do you see as your daily routine? And I'm finding that even if your daily routine are social events, having a routine in retirement is critical, because without that, people will just drift and they'll get into doing idle things. And then you may also transition, to just being more depressed. So having a routine or some kind of a structure is critical. And then, of course, utility or purpose. Work gives us purpose. Whether you're the CEO of an organization or the mailman, you know that others are relying on you, and it gives you a purpose. So what will give you purpose in retirement? Maybe it's a volunteer. Maybe it's again, helping, children with watching grandchildren. And then socialization. Work gives us socialization. Even if you're just saying good morning to someone, how are you going to satisfy your socialization needs? And then status. We all have a status or a place within a community. We're all part of a tribe. How will you replace your need for status in this next stage of life? And where will you get this from? So these are just things to think about as you transition. So work could look very different. And I work with clients a lot on their career transition. And I really see this next stage of life as another career. It's another career in your life. And many of those the best career decisions are made with introspection. And continuing to work can take many different forms. Maybe it is full-time in the same field. Maybe you try something new. Maybe it's self-employment, consulting, volunteer work. There's a whole host of different approaches. And again, because baby boomers are living longer and they're wanting work in their lives, we're reinventing ourselves. And I often like to consider this retirement is really about rewirement, because so many people just, when they say the word retirement, it's like they just cringe. And there's some people doing some really exciting things. So an investment consultant may apply his or her expertise to a nonprofit, or a dentist can connect dental students with apprentices, but who are starting their own practices. So there's a whole host of different examples or different things that you can do to repurpose. And one of the hardest things is really figuring out, what do I want to do? What will give me fulfillment? And that's where where individuals, you can step back and think about what will work mean to you in this next stage of life. The other area that people struggle with as they transition is the notion of leisure. And I define leisure as what do you do when you don't want to do anything else? And one person's leisure could be another's work. And I'd like to tell you the story about a CEO who every Thursday night, he goes to a men's shelter and he spends the night. He doesn't pass out food or he doesn't have a role, but he just stays the night and he is there. He's available to any of the men who would want to talk. And he shared that at 6 a.m. in the morning when he's in his car and he's leaving, this is a time where he feels so good. His just being there gives him a source of purpose and fulfillment. And so in retirement or in this next stage, leisure becomes center stage. And how do you look at leisure? What does it mean to you? Especially if you're someone who is very, hard charging and it's work, work, work. Answering the question, what do you do when you want to do nothing else? And for many people, that could be work. And so in this next transition, to think about what will you do when you want to do nothing else? And some of you may get a chuckle that on this next slide, because there are 6 types of leisure. And sometimes when I work with clients, we will spend time to really talk about what type of leisure do you enjoy the most. And for many people, especially if work has been such a central part of your life, this is a time to try new things. Maybe it's social interaction. Again, what gives you joy? It could be watching TV, concerts, sightseeing. Many people travel. And certainly I am not saying that having a retirement life of leisure and travel is not the way to go. But blending work and leisure is what we're seeing more and more people do. So leisure, maybe it's physical exercise. Again, pickleball is the hottest growing activity that baby boomers are taking part in. Reading, doing crossword puzzles, giving yourself permission to read a book. And how will you integrate leisure into your retirement or your next life stage? This next exercise is an exercise that I invite people to do at any stage of life. And it's looking at your 6 life arenas. And it's really where you spend your time and your energy, because where you're spending your time and your energy will determine not only your current satisfaction, but your next stage life satisfaction. You're going to have a handout after this webinar with the 6 life arenas: career, family, relationships, self, community, and leisure. And you can change the life arenas. These are just 6. And I would invite you to list where you're spending your current time. How much time do you spend on career, family, relationships, community? And then as you think about your next life stage, where do you see the shifts? Do you see yourself spending less time on work and maybe more time on relationships? Or maybe spending less time on leisure and more time on community? This exercise, and this is a great exercise to do with your loved ones, with a spouse, with a partner, because it can help with alignment, and it can also enable you to start to think about, where do you want to start making some shifts? So if you are maybe, 2 or 3 years away from this next stage of life, how might you now start to maybe shift a little bit and start to integrate what your next stage of life might look like? So this is a tool that you can do, and again, it's a great tool to do with a partner or a spouse. People who can envision themselves in the future are motivated to care for their future self. Can you see yourself at 65, 75, 85? And the more you can start to think about, what will my everyday look like? What are some things that I want to have more of, less of? What will give me joy at these different life stages? The easier your transition will be, and the more fulfilling. So the question that I would like to leave you with is, how will you design your retirement life? The people who do best in retirement have created a vision of their desired retirement lifestyle. How will you design your retirement life? So we've given you today some tools, some things to think about, some questions as you move to this next stage and think about what will give you the most joy and fulfillment. Thank you, and I will turn it back to Anna.
Great. Thank you, Paula and Stephanie. We appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge with us today and your expertise. And we hope this has been helpful to everyone listening today. We had one person after we did this program live that reached out to me and said, after this program, I really thought about all the different organizations I'm involved with outside of work today, including several boards. And I'm trying to decide now, how am I going to evaluate those and think about where I want to be? So he was like, thank you for giving me takeaways that I will actually go home and use after this program. So it's always great to hear things like that. We hope this program has done that for you, and we look forward to bringing you other events in the future and hope you can join us for those. So thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next program.